Silicon Valley is infamous in the startup world, but could the tech and semiconductor hub Taiwan create a startup haven of its own?
I remember 10, 15 years ago in Asia, people were saying if you go to your mother-in-law and say, I want to be a startup founder, she would frown upon it. And
You don't hear a lot about Taiwanese startup success stories, but they do exist. And then there's great software companies that are being created in Taiwan, but a lot of it doesn't get talked about.
What many people don't realize about Taipei is that you have a lot of successful Taiwanese founders, Taiwanese American founders, like Steve Chen, founder of YouTube, Kevin Lin, founder of Twitch, and many others who recently moved back to Taiwan to invest and support the ecosystem there.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Susan Chow, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. Almost every startup survey or ranking puts San Francisco at the top of the list. Many will have New York next, and most likely Los Angeles in the top 10. What do these cities have that inspire innovation and help startups scale? And why do so many of the world's most impactful tech companies like Meta, Amazon, and OpenAI come from that part of the world? To understand what makes a great startup hub and how Taiwan can position itself as a leading ecosystem, we're joined today by Mark Birch, a startup founder and author of the book Community in a Box. While with Amazon Web Services, or AWS, he studied more than 30 startup ecosystems from around the world. He'll be moving from New York to Taiwan to start his new software venture. Also joining us is Chok Ooi, a serial entrepreneur who is a co-chair of the group 42 Geeks. He restarted 42 Geeks 2 years ago, an organization dedicated to fostering startup investment and collaboration opportunities. He also co-founded Agility.io, a software development company, and is based in New York City. Welcome, Mark and Chok. It's nice to have you both on the show. Mark, the US is home to the most dynamic startup ecosystem in the world, notably Silicon Valley and New York City. What advantages did you see in building a startup outside the US?
I think it really comes down to three factors: cost, talent, and lifestyle. And as much as I love San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and I've lived out there, I do believe that it's a myth that is the only best place to launch a startup. It became the default because the VC industry grew up there and it brought in a lot of tech talent, and that was where the money was. But when you consider cost and lifestyle, a place like Silicon Valley is very expensive, and you may have quality of life issues. And so it starts to become suboptimal. And then when I was thinking about building somewhere outside the US, what could be more attractive, especially given the rise in digital talent and entrepreneurship programs, smoother entry programs for foreigners coming to countries to build businesses. All those factors made some other locations look a lot more desirable. And particularly when it comes to Taiwan, they have this thing called the Taiwan Gold Card. And when I heard about it, actually on the 42 Geeks trip that we may talk about later, but it was really eye-opening, the level of just openness and how they're inviting entrepreneurs to explore working and building businesses in the country. And so a lot of those factors made, particularly Taiwan, really interesting, and also a lot of other places that are, I think, also on the radar for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Well, that's great to hear, and I think you made the right choice. I've been here for 20 years, and I really love it here. Chok, tell us about 42 Geeks. I understand it was previously called Geeks on a Plane. Is it as much fun as it sounds? What has led you to want to restart the group 2 years ago?
Yeah, so Geeks on the Plane was started by my co-founder, Dave McClure, who was the founder of 500 Startups about 14 years ago. He was working at Founders Fund, and he pretty much went to Sean Parker and said, hey, I want to bring a bunch of tech people to travel the world to learn and see what's happening outside of Silicon Valley so that we're not stuck in this echo chamber. And Sean Parker just said, just go do it. And that's what Dave did, started Geeks on the Plane. And for almost 10 plus years, they've brought hundreds of geeks, VCs, founders, successful founders, and other kinds of investors. And we tend to go to ecosystems which are emerging. And from there, built a lot of relationships and also a lot of investments. And I was a participant on 7 of those trips. It totally changed my life. Today, I have connections to tech people almost anywhere in the world. Anyone that wants a connection to, whether it's people in Egypt or in Dubai, in Brazil, in Taiwan, or in Southeast Asia.
Well, that sounds like a ton of fun. I would love to be able to go on one of those trips someday. Mark, I understand you have evaluated a few cities globally when you were looking to start your new venture. Which ecosystem did you find most interesting for startups?
I have to say, there wasn't anything very intentional at first. In my previous role at Amazon Web Services, I was global startup advocate. And what that meant is I would go to all these different places to speak at events, creating content, being engaged in these various different ecosystems to support startup founders. And in that time, the 4.5 years I was with AWS in this role, it gave me an incredible opportunity to go in depth to over 30 different countries, 6 continents, and to really get an understanding of what makes a particular startup ecosystem click, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the upsides, what are founders on the ground really facing when they're building from the ground up in these locations. A few that really come to mind. I was fascinated with Vietnam because I think it's one of the fastest growing just economies and ecosystems in the globe, and I've met a ton of startup founders there. I looked at Thailand, Malaysia, but also places elsewhere like Argentina, where you have a lot of really great tech talent, a place like Spain, South Africa, just to name a few examples. But as compelling and interesting as some of those places were, they each had a significant downside. It could have been just economic or political stability. Maybe there were talent issues, language barriers, policies, infrastructure. So when I looked across the board, I started to build out this matrix or a spreadsheet of all the places I've visited, my impressions, the things I've captured around some of those key things I mentioned just now. And when I factored everything in, Taiwan just really hit the top mark in every category.
Yeah, it's actually a really, really hidden gem in this part of the region. Chok, with the 42 geek tours, what sparks do you look for when deciding which ecosystem to visit? And what is that special mix of traits that will excite the group's founders, executives, and investors?
So we like to go on a mix of places that are emerging, where it is still underdiscovered. And that's why we brought about 50 geeks to Taipei last year. And also that was actually Mark's first time going to Taiwan, is coming in with the geeks. Sometimes we also go back to ecosystems years later and see that it is way more developed. And what's exciting is when on the earlier trips, some of the geeks or the VC firms traveling with us would have made investments. And then to come back, 5, 6, 8, 10 years later, some of those companies have become unicorns. There have been exits, IPOs. To see that, and then to see now because of those successes, people who work on those companies started going out and forming new startups, and the ecosystem starts to build up from there. To see that is just very exciting, and seeing how that formula is being adapted across the world. But a few cities, a few countries have been able to do it a lot more successful than others.
Let's now take a look at the world's top 40 ecosystems, such as Silicon Valley, London, and Singapore. Altogether, they still make up 2/3 of the global venture money for Series A. This is according to Startup Genome's Global Ecosystem Report this year. However, there has been a gradual but steady rise by the top 100 emerging ecosystems. The likes of Barcelona, Dubai, and Taipei are claiming close to 20% of the global share. Chok, Agility.io now employs around 400 engineers in Vietnam. You also co-founded Kenzie Academy in the US, a coding school that trains software engineers to become tech leaders. Do you see a large gap between supply and demand in tech talents across Asia?
Like Vietnam produces a lot of high quality talent, but previously it lacked enough entrepreneurs that are leveraging those talent to build companies within Vietnam itself. And it became instead a powerhouse for exporting those talent through outsourcing to Silicon Valley, to New York, Europe, and all these places that you mentioned. And then on the other hand, you have places like Malaysia that has a lot of high quality founders, but it is much more difficult for them to find high quality tech talents. And then Indonesia, which is a very big market in Southeast Asia. You have companies that raise a lot of money, and they're able to then purchase really, really top-notch quality talent by paying a lot for those talent as well. So there's definitely unevenness across the ecosystem. But what we're seeing is over time, as with the internet, information knowledge is now equally available to people anywhere in the world. We are seeing a lot more proliferation of high quality talent in Asia and throughout the region.
Yeah, I guess also with previously the experience of COVID, there was also a lot more remote working across. So I guess that maybe also helps as well, huh?
I remember 10, 15 years ago in Asia, people were saying if you go to your mother-in-law and say, I want to be a startup founder, she would frown upon it. And companies today, now it's actually people are proud to wear the badge. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder, I make zero salary, but wait 10 years, I could be a millionaire. So the culture shift and change, I think, really does encourage a lot more young people to take risks and to come into this ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the innovation mindset is really, a big shift in the way that the younger generation behaves versus the previous value. So Mark, coming back to you, I'm interested because I heard that even before moving to Taiwan, you call the island the best kept startup secret. Can you tell us more about that?
I had a meeting maybe a couple of months ago, was with some of the folks from the Taipei government. And they had a delegation coming over from Japan, and they'd invited me in. And they wanted to just get a sense of what people's impressions are of Taiwan as a potential startup hub. And I remember thinking to myself, you don't hear a lot about Taiwanese startup success stories, but they do exist. And then there's great software companies that are being created in Taiwan, but a lot of it doesn't get talked about. I think part of it is maybe just a sense of humility, or just really just focusing on execution. And if you look back at where the key industries are, where Taiwan has become a powerhouse, semiconductors and contract manufacturing, those are very much execution-driven types of industries where you have to be very precise, level of precision. And I just think that focus has kind of turned people's attention away from maybe promoting or boasting about all these wonderful things that are happening in Taiwan, and just kind of getting heads down and just focusing on building the business, which is great, but then no one hears about these success stories. In fact, there's a really interesting case of a company that is powering these cosmetic brands around the world called Perfect. They're a public company. I think they're $1 billion valuation. And no one knows that they're a Taiwanese-based company. They actually got spun out from another company, I think maybe CyberLink or what have you. But they based themselves in San Francisco when they got listed on the New York Stock Exchange. But they're driving that visual experience. So there's great software being created here. There's great success stories, but they're not out there in the world.
One thing I want to add to Mark, usually for an ecosystem to be successful, you need a first generation of success stories, exits, IPOs. And that's the challenge with many cities and countries that don't have that. So what's interesting and what many people don't realize about Taipei is that you have a lot of successful Taiwanese founders, Taiwanese American founders, like Steve Chen, founder of YouTube, Kevin Lin, founder of Twitch, and many others who recently moved back to Taiwan to invest and support the ecosystem there. So what it is happening is they are creating this initial spark that is typically needed in the ecosystem, where they are short-circuiting the learning process by mentoring the founders and then also investing in them and supporting them. So that is a huge accelerant. So we believe that that would help spark pretty much the growth of the ecosystem in Taipei, and hopefully over the next few years you'll see some successful exits, and then those founders will then turn around and mentor the next generation, and that's how you replicate or how you create a new Silicon Valley in Taiwan.
You need people that don't just build, but want to take big bets. And I think that's what you're seeing in some of the more advanced emerging startup ecosystems are those builders that are willing to take bigger, higher risk bets. And that becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because some of those companies will be successful, and that creates more capital, more wealth, more jobs, more talent on the ground that can work from that 0 to 1, and then that 1 to 100 to take the company global. And that's something I see that's kind of happening right now in Taiwan, is that those early success stories are starting to build that foundational layer to give the next generation entrepreneurs the confidence to think big, to go global.
One thing about Taiwan, because the population, the market is small, relative. Like if you're in India, if you're in like Brazil or Argentina, you have the comfort of a huge local market that you can develop for. So with Taiwan, the entrepreneurs are almost forced to build day one for a global market, or to test out the concept in Taipei by quickly requiring to scale that globally. I think where companies will succeed in Taiwan are companies that are thinking very global from day one.
Yeah, I think what's great about Taiwan as a market is that it's small enough but advanced enough to do a lot of testing here, and then being able to relaunch those success stories globally. And I think, Mark, your earlier point about branding and promoting and getting the word out is also super important. And having the likes of the YouTube founder and Switch founder being here in Taiwan to be able to set that example and to be able to show the next generation that this is possible. To your point, Chok, I think that's also really great. So, Chok, where are we now in development AI? Because that's a really important element of a lot of the new startups right now, as compared to where you see in the rest of the world. What's still coming ahead in the years to come that we're seeing right now? Can you give us some insights into that?
If you're one of those AI practitioners that is working on it on a day-to-day basis, you quickly realize, and the world thinks that the AI is like an iPhone 16 Pro Max, but in reality, it's more like an iPhone 2 right now. It gives people the impression, because of when you ask it a question, it gives you very, very accurate answers. It gives people a false impression that it is very smart. It can do everything. But in reality, when you're trying to with providing information, it's good at that. But when you try to connect the AI to say, I want to do this and tie it to an action, there's still a lot of technical challenges that people are struggling with. Over the next few years, you'll be seeing proliferation of companies that are building on top of the large language models. They'll be building applications that will make it easier for people to access AI, easier for companies to work with AIs without having to learn prompt engineering, without having to tell the AI exactly what you need to perform the task. It should simplify that significantly for people. So that's what I see that's very exciting, and there will be a lot of companies forming in the next few years that is tackling that.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. Mark, Taiwan is known to be much further advanced in hardware tech. How do you see its software potential, particularly for AI development, as I just asked Chok?
Having been on the ground with a lot of builders, a lot of software developers over the past few months, as I get more up to speed on Taiwan and getting my own startup launched, it it's really dawned on me that there's an incredible level of technical capability, but there may be some missing components of some of that expertise around thinking about scaling, thinking about technical architectures. But the creativity, the ability is definitely there. And you're starting to see a lot of companies now that are doing quite some interesting things in AI, like Appier is doing some work, Pic Collage. So there's companies on the ground that are already proving their chops in AI and putting it out there with products that are being used by hundreds, thousands of users around the world.
I do have a different take on that. I think like Taiwan was very successful in hardware because the education system, the culture where people in hardware you need to be very precise. Precision is key, and I think the Taiwanese education culture trains people to be very good at following instructions, in following SOP, standard operating procedures, and therefore that's why Taiwan became a powerhouse in terms of hardware and semiconductors. But software is a very different beast. Software AI, it requires much more creative thinking, and you typically, successful companies think outside the box and take risk and typically do not follow a standard operating. Whatever had worked in the past may not work in the future in the software business. So I think for Taiwan to make that switch, make that leap into also becoming a software powerhouse, the education, the culture needs to change. People need to be comfortable with a little bit of messiness, a little bit of kind of a cowboy approach, with like Facebook, move fast and break things, create chaos, but then control that chaos. So I think that is one major hurdle Taiwan needs to overcome in order to transition successfully into software and AI.
Mark, you mentioned the Taiwan Gold Card visa program, which has brought in more than 11,000 foreign professionals and entrepreneurs to Taiwan since 2019. We asked its managing director, Jonathan Liao, about how the program was designed to fit Taiwan's industrial and entrepreneurial needs.
This was a long-term goal to raise the national competitiveness of Taiwan's industry. So the Gold Card was specifically for foreign specialist professionals, which means people with special expertise in identified 10 different industries, such as science and technology, economy, education, culture and arts, etc. The latest one was amended in 2021 to include a digital industry, which are people of digital backgrounds, such as cybersecurity, software engineering, e-commerce platforms, etc. Identifying a need for specifically tech talent, software talent working in these areas. This is different than most countries where, visas, you are required to be sponsored by an employer. You're allowed to work for yourself. You can work for an employer. You can start a business. You can work remote. And all of these are actually traits which, allow foreign entrepreneurs to live here, use it as a base while working on their startup ideas.
Mark, you published a book, Community in a Box, and are also building a stealth startup. What business opportunities do you see in building communities?
Community in a box. Woo! Yeah. So I actually came into this idea of community by complete accident. I was helping out a bunch of founders in New York City who had particular challenges around how to sell to companies, something that I was actually quite good at with my own startup. So over time, I just figured, why don't we just all get together? I can get some pizza. I can invite some people I really trust who have really great knowledge to share about how to sell the businesses, and they can ask them all the questions. What I didn't expect that a lot of people would show up to these monthly gatherings, and eventually we would have sometimes upwards of 200 people showing up for one of our monthly events in New York City, all on B2B selling. And then people in other cities would also want their own chapter. So I started launching these chapters around the globe, from Singapore to London to Hong Kong, Toronto, all over the place. We had 24 chapters, 30,000 members. And it dawned on me, this thing about community, it's incredibly powerful. And particularly over the past few years, what's happened is a lot of businesses have started to realize that there's a lot of power in community, but it's really hard to unlock it. And the more challenging thing is actually trying to specifically measure how community impacts business results. And being at Amazon Web Services, we're a company that's very data-driven. And I was in an organization called Developer Relations that was specifically engaged in community activities. And it was even difficult for us to figure out, what are we measuring? And are the things that we measure actually able to create a clear line to business impact? And as I started thinking about things that I'm passionate about solving, that I'd want to dedicate my next 10 years of my life to building, I realized I love communities and I want to be able to solve this problem. Because I think a lot of companies are starting to invest a lot of money, including Amazon, a lot of tech companies, and other industries as well. But they want to know that they can know how healthy the community is. They want to know how they could improve the community, have it be more effective, and then also tie that back to business results.
That sounds very exciting. You know, there's a saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a group. So Chok, if you had to relocate your current startup or open a second office outside the US, which country or city would you choose and why?
To choose one is very, very difficult. In my finalist list, Singapore for sure, Saudi Arabia, which is getting very exciting for the tech industry. If I'm looking at South America, then it will be Montevideo in Uruguay, which is very, very business friendly, and there's a lot of talent over there. And if I'm looking for a fast growing market, Brazil.
And on that, I know, Mark, you have just recently obtained your Taiwan Gold Visa card, so congratulations on that.
Yes.
Well, thank you both for joining the show today. Chok Ooi and Mark Birch, a pleasure having you both in the program. Thanks again. For our viewers everywhere, I'm Susan Chow. Thank you for joining us. If you like this episode or wish to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.